On today's show, the Phoenix Suns signed Tyus Jones to a one-year deal to become their starting point guard. How much better are the Suns with Tyus Jones? What does it do to the rest of the Suns' rotation, and how good are they now in the Western Conference? It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Look, I don't know about you. My least favorite thing when I'm buying tickets could be to go to a baseball game, basketball game, a concert, whatever, right? Is you're going through the ticket buying process, you're all excited, you're picking out your seats and everything. Then you go to check out, and you get price gouged at the very end. They start hitting you with the service fees and digital handling fees and convenience fees, and you end up paying more in fees than you do for the actual tickets. It's not like that with Game Time. They have their all-in price from the jump, so you know exactly how much you're paying for your tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Suns, Brendon Kleen, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Suns. Brendon, the Suns making arguably a really huge addition here late in the month of July. We'll say the biggest remaining free agent guard on the market in Tyus Jones, choosing to sign with the Phoenix Suns on a one-year, $3.3 million deal. Let's start with there's a lot of significance to this deal and to the addition of Tyus Jones. Let's just start with how important of a pickup this is for the Suns, with the idea that he signed with Phoenix to be their starting point guard. That was one of the contingencies, one of the reasons that he ultimately chose Phoenix over some of the other potential destinations he could have gone to.
Yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this changes everything about their team. You know, they all last season were banking on this spontaneous, unpredictable style of basketball. You could say that was just making the most of a tough situation with the way the roster broke and not having a point guard like Tyus Jones after trading Chris Paul for Bradley Beal to assemble this big three. They never really replaced Chris Paul. They had a by-committee approach to creating offense. They signed Monte Morris early on in free agency, and that starts to get your wheels turning. Okay, they're going to have that option now. They're going to have a floor general if they want it. Now, with this acquisition and the idea that Tyus Jones will step into that starting spot, Monte Morris didn't go anywhere. You're looking at potentially 48 minutes of the ball in someone's hands who is not the big three. And that can be good, that can be bad, but either way, it'll be a massive adjustment to how this team plays, how those guys are used, and ultimately, you know, what this team looks like on the court.
Who do you think this addition, and then obviously, you know, Monte Morris being one of the other, additions for the Suns this offseason, like you said, having 48 minutes of point guard play, who do you think that ultimately helps the most? Does it help Booker the most? Does it help KD the most?
I would say it's probably Durant. It's funny to say that, though, because he had one of his, you could say, the best season post-Achilles tear of his career last season, given that he played 75-plus games, 37-plus minutes per game, All-NBA second team, was really the anchor for this group, had awesome moments defensively, shouldered a lot on the offensive end, but there were just too many moments where either he was doing way too much or hardly anything at all. There wasn't a rhythm and a consistency to how Durant was being deployed, where his shots were coming from, how much the ball was in his hands. And those are the types of things you hope players like Jones and Morris are able to do. So I think it's Durant.
You know, when you look at this, I'm curious what this does ultimately to Phoenix's projected kind of depth chart. Conventional wisdom would say, okay, well, Tyus Jones, he's taking the starting spot. You still got Booker, Beal, KD, and Nurkic. Is there any world at all, though, where Bradley Beal isn't in the starting lineup come the start of this next season?
I get the idea. I mean, obviously, the potential for what he could be with the second unit, what it would do to just balance things out, right? Like in theory, I get it. And Suns fans have been calling for it, frankly, since before they got any of these point guards, as a way to try to just make this work better, because it was so awkward at times last season and guys were throwing the ball all over the gym. The pace was out of whack. The fourth quarters looked awful. It was just, can this work? Maybe. But it's one of those things where when you make this deal and you get Bradley Beal a year ago to waive his no trade clause and come to Phoenix and give up all these pick swaps, and like I said, Chris Paul and a contract and a role player in Landry Shamet, you got to just make it work. And the way to make it work is not to play these guys together less or to lower any of their minutes. The way to make this work is to try and have all of them together, firing on all cylinders, fitting, developing chemistry, and working it out. So maybe he closes games. Maybe there's a world where the best way is still him coming off the bench. But the way that I've been putting it is the list of players in NBA history as good or even close to as good as Bradley Beal who have done that is, to my memory, basically one. His name is Manu Ginobili, and he's a legend because he did that. If it was common, maybe I would buy it. It's not common. Guys like this don't accept that role because they shouldn't have to. So I think it's just a matter of, can a new coach, some of these new roster pieces, can that just bring the most out of this big three? If not, you're probably talking about blowing this big three up rather than trying to bench one of them.
Speaking of the big three and the experiment that has yet to really, realize any tangible results, I get, relative to expectations for this past season, what does Bradley Beal have to be for this Phoenix team to work? Does he have to be a star? Do they have to be a true, big three, or can this Phoenix team succeed even if Bradley Beal is just a quality level rotation player for the Suns?
I think that's the right way to look at it. I mean, my tune since the season ended and how it ended with that sweep in the first round at the hands of the Minnesota Timberwolves has just been, the Suns need the big three to do more things that are not what stars typically do, right? And I think that's just how it always goes when teams are built this way. Chris Bosh had to do that, right? I mean, even Dwayne Wade had to do that in Miami, more of a cutter, more, the story's been told a million times.
Yeah,
so
we're seeing it with Boston right now. So many very talented, arguably not 3-star level players, but 2 all-stars and then a bunch of really high tier caliber players who all kind of have to sacrifice a little bit and do more than what they're probably accustomed to than just staying in their lane as a quote unquote star, right?
Absolutely, right? I mean, Steph Curry notably sacrificed when Durant came to town, and Klay Thompson just left partially as a result of always playing. It happened. This is always the story of building basketball teams. You can only have 5 guys on the court, and theoretically only a couple of them are really going to do a lot on the offensive end. But with that said, back to Beal. In this version of the team, assuming that both Tyus Jones and Monte Morris play a lot, I think that he is going to be more of it sounds crazy, but like a 3-and-D wing, frankly, on this team. Can he upped his 3-point frequency, his 3-point attempts a little from where he was the past few years in Washington in his first year with the Suns last season? Can he tilt it even more that direction? Can he be a good team defender? And I think he has the burst and the length to do that. He is going to be undersized. This whole team is going to be undersized. That's going to be one of their weaknesses, but that's kind of the idea. Off-ball scorer, 3-point volume, floor spacing option, defender who can, guard some guys one-on-one, but most of the time probably going to be guarding, in space and kind of second side and trying to force turnovers and do those types of things. I think that's probably what we see, but I don't know if we know any of this big three's exact role yet, given how much the rest of the roster and the coach is different and how you're not going to replicate what it was last year because that didn't work.
Obviously, a completely kind of revamped roster. We won't say completely revamped. Some familiar faces, right? So bringing back, guys like Royce O'Neal, Damian Lee, Josh Okogie, Bol Bol, all the re-signings this offseason. Brought in Mason Plumlee for some additional big man depth. We mentioned Monte Morris a couple times, and now the most recent signing of Tyus Jones. So, some new faces in addition to bringing back some old ones. To make this thing work, though, obviously bringing in Coach Bud, right? Giving, a fresh look from the coaching department. What feels like a realistic achievable ceiling for this Suns team this next year? Because you start looking at this team on paper, we talked about the importance of the Tyus Jones thing very early on in this segment, but it does feel kind of transformational to where this one signing kind of really changes the dimensions of this Suns team. Now they have depth. You're going to be able to bring a guy potentially like Grayson Allen off the bench now. That's kind of huge. It kind of, I'm looking at this Suns team like if everything breaks right, this could be a team in the West to be, a number 1 or number 2 seed if everything breaks properly.
This whole offseason has been about trying to reclaim flexibility when the CBA is doing its best to not allow them to have it. They have contracts they can trade. They have depth where if they need to trade one of those contracts, it's not a zero behind that player in the rotation. It's also been about raising the floor of this team. Last year, their whole offseason was taking these jackpot lottery chances on what the GM of the Suns, James Jones, called mid-prime veterans. Guys like most probably in the audience already forgot they were ever on the Suns because a lot of them got traded, but Keita Bates-Diop and Jordan Goodwin and these kind of could they be something types. And none of them were. They all basically flamed out. Almost zero of those guys panned out. So they went out this offseason and they said, we're going to get vets. Even before the Tyus Jones thing, it was Monte Morris, re-signing Royce O'Neal, Mason Plumlee. They did make 2 draft picks, but those guys are unlikely to play. Damian Lee back, Josh Okogie back. Guys you can trust to just play minutes and fill a role during the regular season, given that there is some injury concern with this big 3 as well. So I think they'll be, their over-under. I know a lot of us on the network covered the FanDuel over-unders that came out this past week. They're at 46.5. They won 49 games last year. I think people forget because it was so ugly and the path to it was so messy. They were the 6th seed. They won 49 games. When all 3 guys were healthy, they were on a 50-plus win pace. So if you just kind of map that out and say the depth is better, they should be in a decent position to get a decent seed in the West once again. I think the other thing that this acquisition of Jones to add one more really quality rotation player has done is just they can trade just about anybody outside of the big 3 now if they want to without blowing up their whole team. Last year, that wouldn't have been possible. They would have had to really change who they were to even get rid of one rotation piece. Now, Nurkic, Allen, O'Neal, Okogie, all these contracts that they have at their disposal, if they trade any of them, they have another Mason Plumlee behind Nurkic. They have a Damian Lee to fill in that Grayson Allen role, for instance. So a lot of this is going to help them. It also gives them more options when we do get to February, and I still expect them to keep tinkering.
How much better does Tyus Jones make the Phoenix Suns for this upcoming season? What will the big 3 look like playing under Coach Budenholzer? You're going to have us covered for all that and so much more over at Locked On Suns. Brendon, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks, Jackson.